Welcome to Listen In. I'm Brian Gahan, and this podcast focuses on the stories that are buried deep inside all conversations. Be it the kind of conversation you have with someone whose life experience is full of interesting POVs and insights, or the kind of conversation you have inside your own head around your own life experiences. Today, in episode 7, I'm talking with Erika Nielsen, professional cellist, mental health advocate, and author of the book Sound Mind, in which she outlines her bipolar journey and story of hope, healing, and transformation. Be it music, mental health, or facing the struggles of being a professional freelancer, Erika has navigated the turbulent waters of all three and is helping change the narrative around mental health and wellness. Hi, Erika. Welcome to Listen In.
Thanks, Brian. I'm so honored to be on your show and really excited about it.
Yeah, I've really been dying to talk to you about music and how music came into your life and how it developed, in those early stages, because I'm always fascinated with people that are professional musicians. I'm in awe.
Oh, good, terrific. Well, I'd love to tell you about that. A lot of professional musicians grew up in a musical home, and that's where it began. So my mother is a musician and still is. She, when I was a little girl, she would teach from home lessons in our apartment. At the time, we were living in Lahr, Germany, and she would teach saxophone, clarinet, piano, and so I lived in a home where the music was part of my atmosphere. And for some families, that atmosphere is hockey, and for some families, that atmosphere is playing chess. And for me, it was music. And so she was my first piano teacher, and then I played a year of Suzuki violin, but I heard the cello in our local symphony, and when I heard that cello play, I think actually the first time I heard the cello was watching Yo-Yo Ma on Sesame Street in the late 80s. It just blew me away, and I knew that not only did I need to play that instrument, I felt like I was that instrument.
And this is the part where I'm dying to find out, okay? So many musicians talk about, I grew up in a house with music, or I was exposed to music. Mm-hmm. But not everybody who grows up in a professional athlete family or in, with a mother or father who cooks really well becomes that profession. And so what is it about music that being around it or surrounded by it permeates into you and then when you say, like, I want to do that, or I knew I wanted to do that, did as an adult, can you look back and go, that I knew that was it?
I think when you're a very young child, you don't know that it's going to be it, or this is what I will do with my career. You don't have a concept of that, but children are very naturally musical, rhythmic, artistic beings, and I'm very fortunate that I got to be a musical child, and I got to tap into that. It wasn't taken away from me. I got to have that. But then as it became sort of part of my life, part of what I did in elementary school, and then in high school, what happens, I think, for a lot of teenagers is they're developing their identities. And then I developed mine around playing the cello and being a cellist, and that felt something clicked around the 8th grade, where I felt like this is not only what I want to do, but who I am. I must continue this way. I now am taking this very, very seriously, and I can't imagine not doing it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's interesting. Now, do you spot that in your students? Like, can you see that?
I do, and actually getting quite exciting. I'm old enough now that I've had some students, actually had one this morning. I've had some students for 10 years or more that I've raised from a 6 or 7-year-old to now 17, 18-year-old. And I noticed that same shift happen for them when they were about 13, 14. At that point, I love to send them off for a summer at a national music camp where I'm on faculty now. But I've been sending my students there for years. And then they get the opportunity to be with other like-minded students, and they find their tribe. And at this point, they either music kind of becomes something they embody, or it becomes something they decide, I'm going to focus elsewhere. And many of my students have kept it, and a few of them want to study very seriously in a university. I know how hard it is. I'm very realistic, but I think you have to follow that plan A dream and try your hardest, and we'll see where it will take them.
So you sort of said a couple of things there, and and part of the reason why I'm diving deep into this is because I have children. They're 12 and 14, but we're kind of dancing around the musical thing, but we didn't dive in, right? And so I'm just wondering, like, did we do something wrong, or that feeling of, as a parent, you're always asking that question to yourself. But so you said, one thing was it wasn't taken away from you because you had a musical mother. She didn't, it's not like, oh, you're going to be a musician. You're going to be an artist. You're crazy. Be a scientist, be a doctor, be a lawyer. Right. So it wasn't taken away from you.
Well, a little bit about that. I would say it was valued as being just as important. As other things, as my school studies. It was valued on a same level of importance, and whereas I think in some other families they may think, wouldn't it be great if you could strum a few chords on the guitar, but they see it very much as extracurricular, just something for fun. We saw it as fundamental, which is very different. Now, that said, I was not raised to be a professional musician. In fact, quite the opposite. As I was starting to make career decisions in high school, my mom, who was a professional, she was an elementary school teacher, first a supply teacher, then full-time, and then became a principal. My stepdad had a full-time job as an engineer. They valued, I'm doing air quotes, real stable careers. Not that being a musician is not that, but you know exactly what I'm referring to.
Yeah.
And they tried to sway me. I remember when I started to get very serious, I remember the words being, you could have that full-time stable job with all of these benefits, and you could have your summers off and your evenings free, and then you could play all the music you want. And of course not. Of course I wanted to defy my parents, but that just made me work harder. And I thought, no, it's not good enough. I take this more seriously than that. It's not enough for me to do this for fun.
Well, that's an interesting thing that, you were defying your parents, who were, one of them was very musical. And so it's an interesting concept that it pushed you more into music than maybe somebody who didn't have parents who were musical and were trying to stop them from doing music, right?
Well, and maybe if they had pushed me to be a professional from the beginning and pushed me too hard, I would have been turned off by the whole thing. And I know that happens to a lot of musicians, where they're pushed too hard by the family and by their teacher, and they just want nothing to do with it after that. So it's actually, I'm noticing this as a teacher, it's such a delicate balance between challenging a student, encouraging them, making sure all doors are open for them, but not turning them off the instrument, and having just the right amount of challenges without too much pressure, and all of those things.
Yeah. So you'd mentioned that it wasn't taken away, and then you talked about it being a fundamental.
Yeah.
And so now, in the part of the world that we live in, in the education system, things like music and art and drama and things are being taken away and not seen.
It's horrible to watch.
So I'm sorry. Go.
Well, I'm actually a little optimistic about that. Here in Toronto, and I see families all the time, they're trying to decide, what art school should I send my child to? When I grew up in Kingston, Ontario, there were, 6 high schools. There wasn't, I didn't have the luxury of choosing the most artistic high school to suit my wonderful interests. I went to the local jock and cheerleader high school, and I became a professional musician without taking a single course in music in high school. I did it all extracurricularly, and it is very sad that funding is being pulled from school music programs. I think if there is family support there, the students that really want to do it can pursue it extracurricularly.
I really wanted to talk to you at the start of our conversation around music, right?
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's just such an important aspect of who you are and your journey, and also how hard you've worked.
Yeah. It's I can't emphasize enough the hard work part of it. I mean, there isn't a fast track, and at some point, natural talent only gets you so far. And I remember this in my learning. The people, I remember being told, that those are my peers that had a natural ability. So did I. But at some point, they will lap you in terms of working harder. And, I couldn't get away with not working hard. I wasn't the top prize winner. I wasn't, but I worked really hard.
And spoiler alert, we're going to talk a lot about your book. And so in your book, you talk about the moments in your teenage years, I think, where, you wouldn't necessarily practice that much. And then you would sort of like turn it on because you wanted to accomplish something or prove something or get something. Right. And when you are able to flux inside that gift where you can, I'm going to show up today. Right. What does that feel like when you're, because you're doing all that hard work?
And that's, and I see it in my students now, that's a big lesson to learn on how to practice and do the work consistently. And of course, you learn that lesson by having experiences where you didn't prepare strongly enough and it didn't feel good. You weren't comfortable. You didn't play your best, and that you could have done better had you worked a little harder at it. You have to have lots of those experiences accumulate. I was working with one of my students around this morning. We were reflecting on her recent performance and what went well. What did she wish she had prepared even more for? So that's a big lesson to learn. And I think having a lot of opportunities and little kind of goals along the way. You need many performances. You need many chances to try and see where's that sweet spot where you can feel really good about what you did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to ask you about when it comes to music is how do you prepare, or how do you shift to perform? I mean, as somebody who's, you do a lot of different types of music, you're involved in a lot of different types of.
And I'll say something about that. Last night I was performing Prince's Purple Rain with Classic Albums Live at the Brampton Rose Theatre. And tonight I'm playing Baroque cello, the music of Buxtehude in a Good Friday church concert.
Yeah. and I mean, now thanks to the internet and streaming and all these great documentaries are out there, you get these little glimpses behind, studio musicians and professional freelance musicians. And you realize how incredibly talented these people are at just, adopting genre or picking up here and doing different things. So how, can you talk to me a little bit about your process on how you get ready to perform at that? Like, like last night, was it different than what's going to happen tonight?
Yes.
Or, oh, okay, good.
Well, okay. Well, the process might be similar. I mean, when I'm preparing to play with a rock band, when I'm practicing for that, well, actually the preparation is very similar. I have my chart there. I make sure it's accurate. I listen with the recording. I listen to the album. I play along with the tracks, and make sure that sort of my touch and my shaping and the groove that I'm playing matches the style of the music as well as I can. If I have tricky sections, I mean, they get more of my attention because in the performance you just have to go, and it has to happen. And I must say it went really well last night. And I guess similarly for, say, a Baroque performance, I listen a lot to the music that I'm about to play. I play along when possible. But I've put a lot of work into understanding all of the different styles that I'm capable of working with, to work on, I didn't just launch into playing Baroque music. I studied hard. I attended the Tafelmusik Baroque Institute for 2 summers. I studied privately with Christina Mahler and Eleanor Fry. I did workshops. So I don't just dabble in many genres. I take each one seriously, and it's important to me that I'm very good at what I do, at what I focus on.
Welcome back. I'm talking with professional cellist and author Erika Nielsen about her childhood, moving around, building resilience, and waking up to the feeling of becoming a professional musician. I want to talk a little bit about we've talked a fair bit about music, and I want to talk a little bit more about, your unique childhood. And I'm saying that, and I don't want to label it, but you did travel a lot. You were exposed to a lot of different things. How do you think that affected who you became today? And somebody who's, was that training to be able to be a freelance musician and fly all over the place and do all this stuff? And, does that feel normal now? Or because you had a very interesting childhood, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So as far as the, I guess, uniqueness of my childhood, although there are lots of people in this position, I had one parent in the military. So I was born in Lahr, West Germany. We moved to Canada. I lived in Guatemala for a short time, and then back to Ontario, to Toronto, and then to Ottawa. So a lot of moving around there. And when my parents parted ways, I then grew up steadily in Kingston, Ontario. But they talk about the years before 5 lasting the rest of their lives. So there was a lot of upheaval and moving around when I was little. And that's all very exciting too. Travel opportunities when you live in Europe. I remember, hard to remember, but I know I visited Switzerland and France, and I think all that moving around, I think children kind of get they adapt to that, and they become really resilient. And I developed a lot of resilience based on what I experienced in my childhood. That I think certainly have given me the strength and the perseverance I've needed to do what I do. There's also a sense of when you move around a lot and have that much change in your life, you how can I put it? in some ways it gives you the freedom to take more risks because you're not attached to your life becoming a certain way or being stable. So it was fine for me to take the risk of becoming a full-time musician. Whereas if I grew up in the same house, in the same town I was born in, with the, same two parents the whole way through, steady, I don't think I would have been as comfortable with the idea of taking on a quote unquote risky career that has a lot of flux to it. And so I'm able to go with the flow, with the flux in my work. And certainly I think moving around a lot and having a lot of change happening in my childhood helped prepare me for that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I had a very similar experience. I had we moved a lot when I was young, but I also had just the fortune or misfortune of every single year in elementary school having to go to a different school.
Oh, that's tough. Yeah, and I know others like you, and I have peers who it was that frequent. Their shifting gears was that frequent. Okay, interesting.
Yeah, so like we would stay somewhere for 2 years, but all of a sudden they'd open a new school and, oh, now Brian has to go to that school, even though my siblings all were staying at the other one. But, oh, you're in grade 3 and that school's now for 1 to 3. So now you're mandated to go to that school. So even when we were permanent in one location, I still had this disruption in school all the time.
For better or for worse, I bet.
Exactly. But what I love, and it's the word you just used, resilience. I mean, I love that word.
Me too.
And I almost feel like it's a new word because I don't remember ever hearing it, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And I did a lot of work when I was in the advertising business around HIV prevention. Wow. And they just used to talk about, people that are in the gay community, because it was predominantly focused on gay males, as being resilient. Right?
Oh, yeah.
And that was the first time I heard that word. And I was like, wow, that is such a great word.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's a positive way of looking at something that maybe 50 years ago would have been seen as a negative thing. Like, oh, this child was moved all over the place. They're going to have this problem, that problem.
Right. And I don't doubt that there were consequences to that and other things that happened in my childhood. I don't doubt that, but I also I know that it helped me develop a thick skin, resilience, like we talked about. Yeah, absolutely.
What was it like when you kind of woke up that day and realized you were a professional musician, or you were making your livelihood as a musician? What did that do you remember that feeling?
Yeah, I do. And I've had that feeling many times, and sort of in a setting like I'm in a rehearsal or I'm in a performance, and I think, oh, I'm doing it. It's so cool. I had that experience last night. I was really well prepared, and I'm playing the hit off the record Purple Rain, and I'm digging into my cello part, and the sound in the theater is really good. I can hear everyone around me. I'm really locked into what I'm doing, and I've got goosebumps on my arms, and I'm thinking, here I am. I'm doing this. I've come so far. I remember along the way, I've had a lot of naysayers along the way. Those telling me to get a more stable career. I've had some rough performances and master classes and things like that when I was younger and developing. And I've had, visiting artists that I was playing for tell me. I remember one favorite quote I was told by someone. It's okay to just be a nice person. For example, basically, like, get out while you can. but that, it just made me work harder. I thought, no, I can keep going here. And then along the way, and I would get more paid work. And when I got my first orchestra job, I won the principal cello position of the Sudbury Symphony, and I worked there for 2 years. And that was a huge boost to, there was something about feeling like I had a position that was important to me at the time, because I think it's as close to regular job security that a lot of that we can get to as musicians.
Right.
So on paper, I had a regular paycheck. I had some benefits. It felt quote unquote legit. And then when I left that position, it was very difficult for me to come to grips with it being okay to just be a freelancer. And I worried a lot about whether I would be secure enough. And I took a leap, and it was absolutely fine. And I was able to do it. And, I'm very fortunate that I'm at a point in my career where I check my email and say yes to things, because I get a lot of opportunities to perform now. And it feels good that I'm really doing it.
And the reason why I wanted to ask you that question is because it's sort of going to lead to some of what we're going to talk about in a bit. But the Sudbury orchestra part is great, because I've heard you tell that before, and I right away, like anybody else who just heard you say that, is going to go, "Oh, you lived in Sudbury."
Yeah,
right?
You would think.
and then in the book, you go into the details of what you actually did to accomplish that.
Yes. So for those who aren't familiar with Sudbury, Ontario, it's in northern Ontario. It's about, by car, it's maybe a 3-hour drive from Toronto. I do not have a car. And when I had started my position with the symphony, of course, they wanted me to move there, and that would be the most logical thing to do. But I had a lot of work and students here in Toronto, and I somehow carved out a system where I took public transit weekly so I could perform and rehearse with the symphony while keeping my feet on the ground here in Toronto. And that required taking a red-eye Greyhound bus every Wednesday that rolled into the Yorkdale shopping mall at 5:30 in the morning. And then I would then take a taxi home so that this is in effect to not miss another day of work here in the city. Also, my spouse was doing his PhD at the time, so we weren't in a position to move. So I commuted for that position to make it work so that I could get that experience as a professional musician, and I could kind of get that role on my resume.
And that's why I would urge everybody to read the book, just for those little snippets, because, when you describe having to put your cello underneath the bus and like all of these things that you did, that you were sacrificing everything in order to have this legitimacy, as you described, like feeling like I've made it, or I have a legitimate job in music. It's those types of sacrifices that people don't know. When people get to a place where you are now, where you're feeling confident and comfortable, and you've established yourself, we live in this world of, American Idol and stuff where, it just happens overnight, doesn't it? And it doesn't.
And I have friends and colleagues who had sort of similar positions in a way. I'm thinking of one friend in particular who would be flying to Halifax, Nova Scotia and back just to play with the symphony, but it wasn't quite a full-time enough job to merit them moving there and what do you call it? Transplanting themselves.
Right.
And you hear about it all the time, visiting artists flying from the States just so they can teach at a special school in North America. Musicians do it all the time. My story it's eye-opening, but it's not that unique. And I even see it with lots of colleagues on a smaller scale, driving through the night after gigs, after concerts, trying to beat rush hour traffic to get from Toronto to Hamilton by 6 p.m. And anyway, I guess I did it on a macro scale.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, when you read about it in the book, you definitely see the macro aspect to it.
I just wanted to say another thing. You talked about sacrifice. I mean, what I ended up sacrificing. So over time, my commute became unsustainable, and what I was sacrificing was my health.
Right.
My physical health. I developed chronic gastric reflux. My mental health, I was, not sleeping well. I was very anxious. I had undiagnosed bipolar disorder at the time. No doubt of course my sleep was very much affected from doing a red eye every week. I mean, it was very hard on my body. So I had to end it.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into this next section, which is to talk about your diagnosis and what that meant for you, and when I think of it, I think of fears and anxieties that would come in around something like that too, right? Like what. So just take us, I mean, we want people to read the book because the book's got all the details, and it's really well written, and I loved reading it, as I said to you earlier. But just take us there a little bit and describe like the diagnosis. You just mentioned bipolar. So
okay, just because we haven't mentioned it yet, I wrote this book called Sound Mind: My Bipolar Journey from Chaos to Composure. And the first third of it is a memoir that outlines sort of my childhood and musical life and sort of symptoms along the way that I experienced, and it takes the reader through some very severe difficulties in my teen years, and spoiler alert, it accumulated into it. I received a diagnosis of type 1 bipolar disorder at age 27, which was 5 years ago. I'm now 33. And then the second 2/3 of the book is a self-care manual of the steps I took towards recovery, which is the place I'm in today. So a little bit about coming up to this diagnosis. In my teens, I experienced some very serious depressive episodes. I was suicidal. I presented as bubbly and cheerful and a creative girl, but behind closed doors, I was full. My self-esteem was like zero. My self-worth was incredibly low. So I experienced a lot of depression, very tumultuous depression, and it would be in phases, in episodes, and it followed me through my 20s, early 20s. And so I began seeing a psychotherapist regularly. What I knew about my condition was that and of course, along the way, my family and everybody around me is telling me, oh, you're perfectly normal. It's normal ups and downs of teen years. And that's what this is all about. But I had a suspicion the whole time that this isn't normal. This isn't okay. It's not normal to want to kill yourself. It's not normal. This is not healthy. And so I guess things improved, but I still experienced this horrific depression in my early 20s. And with the suspicion that it was something else, I started seeing a therapist regularly just because at the time I thought, I just want a healthy adulthood. I want to take care of all of my childhood issues and unresolved resentments just so I can, go on my way for adulthood. And that helped me a lot. But I still had this nagging feeling that there was something more going on with the depressions I was experiencing. Now, meanwhile, along the way, I just thought I was being me, but I'd always experienced euphoric, creative flights of ideas and zipping from one task to another and being full of energy and wanting to go for a 6K run at 5 in the morning. And I was always, that had always been a part of who I was. Not for a second did I suspect my euphoric moods to be problematic. And I didn't even consider that. So after I was married, I was 27 at the time, right after I was so eager to kind of tie up all the loose ends and start this new chapter of my life. And I thought, I'm going to get to the bottom of those teen depressions and I'm going to get a professional psychiatric diagnosis and they're going to tell me I'm normal and I'm going to go on with my life. And I'd love for you to read this in my book, but that is not what happened.
Yeah, no, it's, but I loved how you describe it as the fact that, you were kind of like, almost like, I'm going to check this off. I'm going to take care of this and and then I can put it behind me and I can get on and everything will be great.
Exactly. Let's check the health box.
Yeah.
And be done with it.
Yeah. And I think that I think a lot of people can relate to that on a lot of other areas of their lives and their health, right? You go in, okay, I'll just get my yearly checkup and check it off the box, and then you find out there's something that's not right, and then it changes your life forever.
Yeah.
Is there a pre-post diagnosis shift memory that you have that you can maybe share? Like, what was that like to, we're 5 years in this 5 years, a lot has even already changed around mental illness. But, 5 years ago, you didn't see billboards and, PSAs and people talking about that it's here and a lot of people suffer from it and embrace it, as opposed to, of a lot of illnesses I can think of. Like with like a lot of times with cancer, people want to, they don't want to tell people because they feel ashamed and et cetera. But with mental illness, it's got a whole stigma, or it had a whole stigma attached to it.
It still does. We're getting better. We're working on it. But you're right. It's a vastly different mental health culture now than it was at the time of my diagnosis. And even at the time of my diagnosis, things were beginning to shift. We were beginning to have a conversation around it. Wow. When I was diagnosed with, and they said the words to me, we're about 95% certain that you have bipolar disorder. Without knowing it, I carried stigmas of my own. The images that came to my mind were, vagrant people muttering to themselves on the street. I thought bipolar disorder meant hot and cold moods fluctuating throughout one day. And of course, we know now that it's periods of multiple days to multiple weeks of a mood episode, one way or the other. So I didn't know anything, and I felt humiliated. I was ashamed. Like I had a huge secret. I was frightened of what it would mean for my career as a musician. I was frightened to tell colleagues or tell anybody. I didn't want anybody to know, because any slight against artists in my industry, whether it's an email typo or difficult behavior in whatever way you want to imagine that, can be a mark against you. Mm-hmm. Your business card is your reputation. And all of a sudden I was slammed with a major mental illness label. And we're not just talking, we're now comfortable talking about depression and anxiety. No one is quite ready to tackle bipolar and schizophrenia. Like they're really big ones. They're up there. This was really huge. So at the time I was also in a huge amount of disbelief because I
Right.
had been humming along in my life and thinking I was fine with some occasional depression. I was perfectly, I thought what I thought was perfectly functional, and upon examining my symptoms, that was very clearly not the case.
Welcome back. I'm talking with professional cellist and author Erika Nielsen about being diagnosed with type 1 bipolar disorder and how that diagnosis rocked her foundation as a creative professional. In your book, when you talk about, your specifically your teenage years, you're talking about them through the lens of, here's an example of, kind of how erratic I might have been or whatever. But you kind of look at that and I go, yeah, but that's also normal behavior too.
Sure.
And so I think that, that's probably one of the hardest things around a lot of the mental illness diagnosis is that when do you cross that line to this is normal behavior
Right.
to, oh no, this is something that is an issue that has to be dealt with. And
Well, something we know about bipolar disorder is that you can have a genetic predisposition to developing the illness with the family history of it. But that gene can be expressed or not expressed via epigenetics, which means on account of your environment. So if your environment, if you're exposed to a stressful home environment, which I want to believe that mine wasn't, but it was. If you're exposed to a stressful home environment and chronic stressors in other ways, if you experience trauma, which I did, abuse, which I did, sexual abuse, which I did, then that gene can be expressed, and that's what happened to me. I'm a textbook case of type 1 bipolar disorder. So you see what you think is normal teen behavior in the teen years, and this is why the condition is often misdiagnosed, because it presents as major depression. So then the teenager is treated for major depression, and the medications used to treat depression are different from treating bipolar disorder, and it can sometimes even ignite symptoms. And then the condition sort of develops further in the early 20s, and the bipolar symptoms start to show themselves at that point. It's very commonly misdiagnosed, and it's not uncommon for it to for a patient to not be diagnosed for a decade or more. I recently presented at a mental health gala for the High Notes Avante charitable organization alongside Lou Bagoy and Dan Hill. I was speaking with Dan Hill, the singer-songwriter.
yeah.
He only received his bipolar diagnosis 5 years ago. And this is a man in his certainly late 50s, maybe his 60s. So there's an example of someone not receiving the correct diagnosis until very much later in life.
Well, and that's something that there was I think it was in Whole Note. There was a blog written about yourself in the book, and the writer did a really good job of outlining some things. But he was talking in there about somebody else's quote, again, about Schumann and some other composers back in their days and how they would today be bipolar. And so it's, to me, it's sort of fascinating how I say how normal has evolved. So back then that was just, they're musicians, they're artists, they're like that, and so
Which has permeated, by the way. We've actually taken that romanticized image of the mad artist, and we still, unfortunately, sort of expect expect mental health conditions to be prevalent in artists, and it's true. It's more prevalent in that group of professional artists than it is in the rest of the population. But it's yeah.
Yeah, but it's kind of cart and horse, right? It's like when you have these issues, do you gravitate to the professions or the ways of making a livelihood that forgive some of those ways of behaving, and therefore all the sort of people that are suffering from bipolar end up over in the orchestra, if you know what I mean, right? As opposed to, you're not going to become an accountant. And so, because I'm just going back to your Dan Hill comment about, the late diagnosis, is because there was probably in his earlier years, they're like, oh, but he's an artist, he's a musician, they're expected to work that way. Whereas now, when I talk about the elevation of norm or the evolution of normal, now that's not normal. It's not like we're now.
Well, we can now recognize we can now recognize some of those behaviors that a person would experience as symptoms, not just as odd or erratic behaviors. We can notice that notice that there's a health issue at stake here. There's a health problem that is happening. They're not just being colorful and creative. There's more going on.
And so, tell me about when you got diagnosed, around, because you talk about this in the book, the fear that it would take your music away from you, or was it the source of your music, this energy, or the manic, the pause,
Yeah.
Because, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off there, but I've worked in the creative field for a long time with a lot of different creative people that I do know suffer from different forms of mental health issues, and they'll take their medication and then they'll stop because they'll go, I don't feel like I'm as creative as I was before.
Yes, this is a very common phenomenon. It's called medication non-compliance. And of course, when I started, when I was first diagnosed, I thought, oh no, that's what makes me an artist. That essence, my edge. When I first got over the hump of acknowledging that I did experience manic episodes, that was the big shocker for me, is that there was a name for what I experienced. There was a name, there was a group of symptoms I experienced. It wasn't just me being me. And then I deduced, oh no, that must be what makes me creative and what makes me an artist. And I had experienced in my teens, I took Prozac to treat what I thought was depression, and it was early symptoms of bipolar. And it did make me feel flattened, and it did make me feel dull. And so not only did I hold a stigma against having a mental health condition, I had a stigma towards taking medication, and a lot of people still do. There is now, if you're taking the incorrect medication or improper dosage, it can make you feel flat or dull. So when I began treating my bipolar disorder, I was very much afraid of my creative essence, my being, what made me disappearing. And here's what I found out. It took some not getting used to, but it took time to feel a new normal, and it does take time for a new medication to kick in and get used to it. It took me, this is not uncommon, it can take someone years to find the right combination of medications that work for them when treating any mental health condition, but bipolar disorder certainly. It took me 2 years to find the right mix, and I was patient. I believed in the process, and with regard to the combination I am now taking, I had to do a lot of back and forth reflection as to, am I lesser than I was before? Am I dulled down? And it would seem that way at first, but only because the contrast between those two states was palpable. And as I began to live in my new normal, I've realized that I am creative and I get amazing ideas and I'm musical. I paint, I write, and I'm taking the medication that I take. And I'm still an artist because that is who I am. It's not because of my illness. And my illness is an illness. It is not what makes me an artist. I am not an artist because I have bipolar disorder. And I'm not more artistic because I have bipolar disorder. One of my bipolar peers in the support group I belong to, the Toronto Bipolar Disorder Meetup Group, she's a lawyer, and she is not an artist, but she experiences symptoms like I do, and they relate to her and her work, and her mania fuels her workaholism, etc. I had symptoms a lot like that. So my mania actually made me less productive. I couldn't complete the tasks I started. I would think I had this Rolodex of amazing ideas, but then none of them could really come to fruition. I couldn't fully form them because of my limitations cognitively. I would be flighty from task to task to task. And so I had my illness held me back. And now I'm functioning better than I could have ever thought possible. And I have a very full plate, and I'm able to work and live as an artist. And I am as creative and artistic and as colorful a person as I've ever been. I can just function now.
That's such a great way to put it. I love that. So speaking of the sort of recovery stage and the management stage, managing it, I didn't know whether to call it recovery or managing.
We could call it both. It's not, and I think both terms convey that it's not solved. It's managed. Yeah.
And so you outline a number of wonderful ways of how you figured out how to manage it in your book. So I won't go into, tons of detail into all of that. But I think the thing that was is so important about your book for people who don't have bipolar disorder, but they are freelance of any kind, is how do you manage your mental health when you are a freelancer, under the stresses and the pullings and because most freelancers, they work, if they have work, they work 7 days a week.
Oh yeah. And that was me.
Yeah.
100%. I outline all of the areas of my life that I had to tackle to treat my illness and treat my mental health. But these steps I took are relevant for everybody. And I love speaking to freelancers in particular because I work as a freelancer. I had to change some attitudes at the core. I had limiting beliefs. One belief was that if I'm an artist and a musician, I must just love what I do all the time. Therefore, it's not legitimate work. Therefore, I could work 7 days a week and burn the candle at all ends because I'm enjoying my work so much. If I enjoyed my work, then I must not be working. False. Absolutely false. Of course, it's a job we do, and I've learned to view it that way. I certainly view it that way now. The limiting belief I was holding on to was following me from growing up in a family of non-professional artists. The idea that the romanticized idea that an artist is always doing what they love. Maybe that's true at the core, but work is still work. So when I changed that attitude, I used to not believe that I even deserved a day off. And this came from family attitudes bordering on workaholism, very type A. If I was resting even for a minute, well, I wasn't being productive. And the worst thing you could ever be is not productive. I had to let go of that 100%. this go go go, produce attitude that is permeating our culture and our society is making us all sick. I had to drop that one as well. So so yes, to treat my condition. Now, to treat my condition, I absolutely had to revamp how I viewed sleep, rest, and stress management. And we all need to do this. We all need to overhaul our sleep, the amount of rest we're getting, and manage our stress. But for me, it took a major mental illness diagnosis to face me with that reality. And I think I could say the same as similar. It's similar for those who are faced with any other major illness diagnoses, like cancer or even diabetes. You have to overhaul your diet. And so I finally it clicked for me that I deserved a day off at least per week, just like anybody else who gets weekends. And I actually used to believe I didn't deserve weekends, or I shouldn't get weekends. Also, I had a limiting belief that as a freelancer, I might not know where my next meal is coming from, so I must say yes to every opportunity that comes my way, and I can't say no to any project. Now, I recognize when you're starting out in a freelance career, it is important to accept whatever work comes your way, and we do need to start out that way. But eventually it will snowball and you'll have more work than you know what to do with. And then you find yourself, like you said, working 7 days a week.
Yeah, and feeling like you have to. I mean, it really resonated with me when you said that in the book, because I went from a kind of productive type of number of different careers. I'm somebody who's done a lot of different things in my lifetime, and some of them are very, you can check off the productive piece of it. And then I got into the advertising business and I got into the creative side of it. And I struggled for the longest time because I didn't feel like I was doing anything. I was going to work and I was kind of like just playing. And I don't mean playing in the child playing way, but I was just kind of coming up with ideas. And that's not real work. And, that's not being productive.
Yeah. And playing along to Prince singles isn't working.
No.
That's just having fun on a Wednesday night.
Yeah. But you've got 5,000 people or whatever is there in the audience who've all paid good money.
That's what my work is.
Yeah, to watch you do that.
And for you coming up with ideas and playing around, and no doubt there are like people at Google who lie in hammocks and play ping pong, and whatever they need to do to come up with their next idea. That's part of their work process.
Yeah.
And it's legitimate work. Preparing for any concert, I just have to put in the sheer work hours, and so my work looks different from someone whose work is all based on a computer, for example.
Right, or has a 9-to-5 attachment to it, and
pro baseball players play baseball. That's their work, but you wouldn't. I couldn't believe how I didn't really know this, even studying music in university and in graduate school. I mean, that realization that I'm at work, I am working hard, that came later for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I did love that in the book where you said, like, I'm having fun doing what I'm doing, or I enjoy what I'm doing, therefore I'm not working. And the realization that, we all gravitate to doing work that we love to do that feels like it's not work. But when we get there, we don't understand to embrace it. We feel like I must be doing something wrong. And
I remember I used to think to myself, I'm not working this afternoon. I'm just catching up on email.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm not working this afternoon. I'm just organizing student lessons. Well, no, that admin work, that's actually your work. If you were not working, you'd be going for a stroll around High Park. Yeah. And I'm not doing enough of that. So when I overhauled my lifestyle as a freelancer, here are the big things that I had to put into place for my own mental health. 1, I ensured at least a minimum of 1 day off a week and aimed for 2. So I started taking Mondays off, and a lot of small businesses do that. You'll notice your hairdresser's closed on Mondays. The chocolate store is closed on Mondays, for example. And I used to say to students or colleagues, like, what time works best for you? And I would accommodate everybody else's schedule. And now I say, nope, these are the hours I'm operating, and Monday's not an option. So I didn't have any work boundaries as a freelancer, and I had to create my own boundaries because they weren't made for me. And that's something that I think is really important for freelancers to do, is recognize, when does your workday begin and when does it end? Two, I used to sprint from task to task. I would finish a lesson, run out the door so that I could get to my rehearsal. Ugh. And I would think that I had no choice. And I would think that I was just really busy, and that's what busy looked like. I'm still busy, but busy doesn't look like frantic anymore. And that franticness left me in a constant state of fight or flight, which contributed to my mental illness. It contributed to not feeling great. I was in a constant state of stress, and I know plenty of colleagues who are in that position even right now. I've built into my schedule a minimum of 15 minutes between activities, 15 to 30 minutes of buffer. Is it always possible? No. Is it always realistic? No. But I work very hard to do that. So, student lessons, 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock, 4:15 to 5:15. And it lets me catch my breath. It lets me, grab a snack, check my email, use the restroom, or just lie with my feet up the wall.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's so important. And I think it was somewhere in the book where you were talking just about that, about the fact that, running around frantic, so many people, and I've worked with people like that, where, if they're not cutting every conversation short, leaving every meeting early because of the next thing, they don't feel like they're important or they're busy.
And I really want to speak to that.
Yeah.
We fetishize busyness, and it makes us feel important and validated, and it, it gives our ego a huge burst. And I used to subscribe to that too. When no doubt lots of people who, when you ask them, and I was this person, when you ask them, how are things going for you right now? And they brag, insane.
Yeah.
Everything's insane. It's just, things are insane. I'm so over it, Brian. I'm done with it. You're only functioning at like 60% when you think you're just being extra productive, and then you're not sleeping, and it's the snowball effect. And I can't live with that anymore.
Good for you.
It's exhausting. It exasperates my condition. If I didn't have this condition, I would still need to. I know I would benefit from making these changes. And I love talking to friends about this, because they want to make some of the changes that I made too. And maybe it means that I teach 2 fewer lessons in a day. Maybe it means, now granted, this can affect, one's income, but how much money do you really need? And I would rather feel great than make another $100 at this point. And I realize I'm in a good position to be able to do that. Not everybody can, but my health is more important to me now.
Welcome back. I'm talking with professional cellist and author Erika Nielsen about the lifestyle pillars: sleep, stress level, nutrition, and living mindfully, and how they can be beneficial to everyone. One of the things that I love about your book is that it's not just written for the person who thinks or who has been diagnosed with bipolar and, oh, here's your book. A thing I love about your book is there's the whole story about being a musician, becoming a musician, or being a girl and just growing up. There's all of that. And then there's the diagnosis part and what that was like and how you handled that. And then there's the recovery or the managing of it part. But in the recovering and the managing part of it, what came up for me, and I know this is going to probably sound a bit crass, but thank God you found out you had bipolar.
I agree.
Like I was like, because the changes you've made and the things that you've done, and it's not, I guess what I'm trying to get at is that you're kind of the proof that this stuff matters and works, if you know what I mean. You're not just, oh, we've got this friend, Erika, and she's peace, love, and granola, and you go to her house and she looks after herself and she's mindful, and, that's just the way she is. You weren't that person, and you enjoyed not being that person, but because of your diagnosis, you had to learn how to manage stress, being a freelancer, all of these issues, and it's working for you. And so you're a great example to anybody who's, because we're all going to suffer from some form of mental stress from a lifestyle that's out of balance. And so I really think that your book is a great book for anybody who's just dealing with the stresses of modern life and being pulled in multiple directions. And here are some things that work really well, and they work so well that they keep a disorder like bipolar under control and not a debilitating aspect of your life.
And for someone else following or taking a look at these lifestyle pillars, like their sleep, stress level, nutrition, living mindfully, etc. Maybe they don't have bipolar disorder, but maybe they suffer from chronic anxiety, or they're suffering from their go lifestyle and their workaholism. So I hope, and I know it can be beneficial to a lot of people, maybe everyone.
Yeah, I think that it's it's funny. Like if somebody has a heart disease and they start to eat properly and they get better, we go, yeah, you should eat well. Eating, French fries and burgers is not a healthy lifestyle. So we know that. But when it comes to sort of our mental state, we don't necessarily think the same way, or we don't talk in those languages of like, oh yeah, like no one, like I'm thinking like people will say like, they even have jokes in places where they'll call like a burger a heart attack a burger. Like we acknowledge like you eat that, you could get a heart attack, but we don't have like, oh, this is a mental stress thing.
Yeah. Sometimes I'll chat with a friend and they'll be relaying and then I did this and then I did this and then we had to run to this. And I kind of smile and go, I said, well, that sounds bananas. That sounds like a breakdown waiting to happen. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think we absolutely need to start thinking of these mental health conditions as a health condition, just like diabetes, just like other ailments, and it's starting, and I'm hoping to contribute to that.
Yeah, and you are.
I have this condition. It needs 24 hours a day management.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the treatment is making sure that I get adequate sleep. And it's one of my part-time jobs to make sure that happens, for example.
Yeah, and I was envious because you talk about sleeping 10 hours.
So I hear this, and this is something I want to break open. The response to, now I take medication that allows me to sleep 9-10 hours. And the response I get is, oh, I'm jealous. Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm envious. Or what a luxury. And as a person with a major mental illness to manage, my need for sleep is not luxury. It's my medicine.
Right.
And in the research I've done, now we know how important sleep is. My spouse just read this great book called Why We Sleep. Mm. And I don't know if it was in this book or elsewhere, but we learned that in the Guinness Book of World Records, they have removed the record breaker of going without sleep for the longest amount of time of going without sleep. That's been erased because it's too dangerous.
Right.
Jumping out of an airplane beyond the atmosphere remains. But not sleeping is too dangerous to our health. It is making us sicker. And we know now you can't actually catch up on sleep where you think I can just not sleep all week and on Saturdays I'll sleep until 9 and that will make up for it. It doesn't. So we're facing a sleep crisis, and there are thousands of other sleep experts who are on podcasts talking about the importance of sleep, but the sleep that I need is my medicine, and I think we could all benefit from that same medicine.
Yeah, I once a number of years ago had an MS scare, and which is very, very nerve-wracking at that time, because it's kind of like, oh, you're that age, like this is when it happens, you had this happen, therefore let's take you through this very slow medical analysis to get to the other end to then tell you that you're actually going to be okay. It turned out to be something they call singular sclerosis, which means you had an effect, but it's not happening all over your brain or all over your spinal cord.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. But during that time, I was sleeping 10 hours a day. Like while I was waiting to recover and make myself better, I was able to sleep 10 hours a day.
Great.
And it was the best I ever felt. Right?
That's really powerful that you noticed that.
Yeah, it was the best I ever felt.
Wow.
Because there's something, and I think if you look at it like a luxury, and I don't mean sleep as a luxury, but if you look at it like a luxury, like eating ice cream or, having fun or whatever.
We see sleeping that much as lounging and, not working. I see it as repair. Mm-hmm. Your brain is repairing itself from what you put it through all day.
Yeah. And there's something liberating about knowing that you're not, when I used to sleep for 10 hours, I would wake up slowly. And there's something beautiful about that, right? Like so you're sort of like, you're done. And so when I was talking about laughing or eating ice cream or whatever, it's like having this luxury where you've sapped it for the time. Like you ran this to the finish line, right? Yeah. And you can get up and you feel refreshed and you feel good. And and it was something that was very personal to me, and I never really talked about it. But when I read in your book that, you sleep for 10 hours, and that was the magic number for me as well, was this 10 hours meant that I felt amazing.
Mm-hmm. Certainly can I do on 8 or 9? Sure. But, yes, I do take medication that allows for that to be possible. It wouldn't be possible for me without the medication that I take. Maybe it would, but it wouldn't be nearly successful. And I realize, I'm very fortunate in that I can set my own hours to accommodate this. I can accommodate my sleep needs. Not everybody can. I acknowledge that. So those that, have their 9 to 5 jobs and they have children and they're up in the night, it's not easy. But I think it would be, I want to help people prioritize it more and see it as important as doing our work is. I think it's work. I think we could be doing a lot more work around prioritizing our need for sleep.
Mm-hmm. No, and I think that that's something that we're going to see more and more about. Like you're starting to hear people talk about it. I wanted to read your ending, a little bit of your ending to your book, because I found it, I got emotional when I got there. And so, I don't love reading out loud, but I'm going to read this. It's my hope that one day mental health conditions like mine will be as universally accepted and widely understood as the language of music. Individuals who encounter mental illness will not, as I did, be forced to learn an entirely new vocabulary to understand its implications. In the same way, we are all exposed to music in a myriad of ways as children. I hope we will evolve and appreciate a new universal language of awareness, compassion, self-care, empathy, and well-being. And I believe that's exactly what you accomplished with this book. And it's been my pleasure talking with you. And I wish you nothing but success. And I do hope that it gets into the hands of everybody who can benefit from it. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's been such a pleasure.
You're welcome. Take care.
You too.
All right, just before we go, I want to shout out Erika's touch points. She can be reached on Instagram and Twitter at Cello Erika, and that's Erika with a K as well. You can visit her website, celloerika.com, or go straight to Amazon to find her book, Sound Mind, My Bipolar Journey from Chaos to Composure. Well, that's another episode of Listen In. Thanks for being. Please subscribe, leave comments, or head on over to our website at listeninpod.com. That's listen with 2 N's, pod.com, where you'll find episode notes, links to anything that we talked about in this episode, and you can connect with us about being a guest on Listen In.